YouTube, what's going on? It's Jamar here from Vegas Scents. I got another comparison video again today. And in this video, we are comparing another Louis Vuitton fragrance. And that fragrance goes by the name of Imagination. And we're comparing Louis Vuitton's Imagination to Emper Perfumes Intimation. All right, so before we get started, just want to ask anyone that is brand new to watching this particular channel, if you find the information in this video helpful, definitely share the video. Also subscribe to the channel. Also, for the YouTube algorithm, go ahead and like the video and leave a comment as well. All right. So just getting straight into the video, man, I'm going to go ahead and spray Intimation on my left arm here. And Imagination on my left arm, and Emper Perfumes Intimation on my right. All right. Both of these are pretty smooth, so I can go right in. I'm going to start with Imagination. Imagination starts off with this really sort of tart citron note. And Intimation, the main thing that I get with Intimation is this much sweeter bergamot and mandarin orange note. Definitely more emphasis on the mandarin orange. I don't really get like a tart citrus note from the Intimation at all. This is definitely more of like a sweeter sort of citrus note, in my opinion. It almost sort of smells like the same sort of mandarin citrus that you get in like afternoon swim. That's more so kind of what I get from this particular, the Intimation. Yeah, the Imagination, I mean, when compared to the Intimation, the Imagination doesn't really have much sweetness at all. It's like a really sort of bitter, tart, like lemon citron type of note. And honestly, I'm not really getting much mandarin or sort of bergamot from the Imagination really at all. I mean, I guess maybe a little bit of mandarin, but the mandarin in this one, it doesn't smell like it's like a ripe mandarin at all. This sort of smells like the mandarin that, you know, you have to kind of let sit for a little bit before you can actually eat it, because it's not actually ready to eat yet. It's not ripe. Whereas the mandarin in this one, I mean, it doesn't necessarily smell that natural of a mandarin. It does kind of smell like a synthetic sort of, you know, mandarin aroma chemical or accord, but it actually does smell pretty good. Like I said, it's definitely a lot more sweeter. And I'm getting like a more of a mixture of bergamot and mandarin in the Intimation. Whereas, again, in the Louis Vuitton Imagination, I'm getting just more so like a tart citron and mandarin type of note from this. Now, in terms of how close these are, in my opinion, the Intimation, it definitely is sort of like its own fragrance. You could say this is more so kind of like a inspired by Imagination fragrance, as opposed to calling it like a clone. Because again, from the very start in the opening, these two fragrances are definitely very different. They really are. In terms of closeness, I would say this is maybe like 60% close to Imagination. Now, here's the one thing that I want to make clear, though. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that this smells at all cheap. At at least on my skin anyway. It doesn't smell like a cheap fragrance when compared to the Louis Vuitton. This one it has a different sort of take or interpretation on the scent DNA. Now, as these two start to dry down, the biggest difference between the two is the Louis Vuitton Imagination. That one has way heavier emphasis on that neroli note that's in the mid for this particular fragrance. It basically turns into kind of like this tart citrus mixed with neroli sort of fragrance, whereas the Intimation, you're still getting that sweetness, that like really sweet, ripe mandarin orange. You're starting to get, some of that neroli as well. But in my opinion, the mandarin is still more of a bigger player within the Intimation than what it is in Imagination. The neroli in Intimation is there, but it's a little bit more muted. It doesn't smell like as soapy. Imagination, honestly, and at least on my skin anyway, it kind of smells like almost sort of like a really super high-end body wash or soap. Like, that's the way it comes off. It comes off just like with this really tart citrus and like this really kind of fresh, clean, crisp neroli note. The Intimation is sweeter. You kind of get like a much heavier emphasis on, in my opinion, like that cinnamon, Ceylon cinnamon and ginger. The ginger, not so much, but I get like the kind of spiciness from the cinnamon. And again, it's just sweeter. That mandarin orange note is definitely a lot more prominent in this particular fragrance. And like I said, it almost kind of gives it sort of like that mandarin orange vibe that you get from something like Afternoon Swim. So, I mean, honestly, I would say possibly to some people, this might actually be a better smelling fragrance to them than what Imagination is, honestly. I would say that for Imagination, this would be a scent that if you don't like the note of neroli, right, which I know there's a lot of people out here that do not like neroli-based scents. If you're one of those people that don't like the note of neroli, then Imagination, I think, is something that you probably wouldn't like either at all, or you might not like it that much. Whereas with this one, there's just a little hint of neroli. It's just enough to kind of give it sort of like, kind of like a soapy, clean type of vibe. But at the same time, like I said, there's enough sweetness in this to where the sweetness kind of overshadows that neroli. And there's more of an emphasis on, again, that sweetness and the, more spicier elements from like the ginger and the Ceylon cinnamon. Also, the way that this comes off on me, like this sort of gives you more of, I don't know, almost kind of like a minty fresh type of vibe. Whereas the Imagination gives you more so kind of like a soapy fresh type of vibe. Because again, the neroli in this one, in the Imagination, is definitely a lot more prominent. So really, I mean, it just kind of depends on, I think, what your preferences are. In my opinion, the quality is not really anything in question here for the Intimation. I was able to go right in and smell this as soon as I sprayed it on. Same thing, obviously, that you can do with the Louis Vuitton. So you really you don't get any sort of alcohol blast or anything like that from the Emper Perfumes Intimation. And I mean, just in terms of maybe comparing like the complexity of smells between these two fragrances, I can't really say that the Louis Vuitton is, way more complex than the Intimation is. They do have different, sort of directions that they take in terms of the smell DNA, but they're not like, I can't say that one is necessarily better than the other. All right. Also, I mean, for $19, which again, you can find this on LaBelle Perfumes for $19 plus shipping. And this is actually a 120 ml bottle. This one, man, I mean, for $19, I don't think that there's a better summer scent out there, that you can find. Now, obviously, I'm sure there's probably a lot of other cheap scents that are in that same price range from, like Lattafa and stuff like that I haven't smelled. But so far, this is the best smelling and the cheapest fragrance. Here, let me rephrase that. For the price, this is the best smelling fragrance that I've smelled at this particular price point. Because again, $19, I mean, that's pretty dirt cheap. And this one is definitely punching way above its price range, in my opinion. Now, again, performance, at least on skin, isn't necessarily the greatest with this one. I get about 4 hours or so on skin when I wear this, but I get a lot more when I put this on clothes. The last time I wore this on clothes, I sprayed it on clothes only, and I got like 7 or 8 hours out of this. So if you don't mind spraying on your clothes, then, I mean, you should be good to go with this one. Now, the performance may change with this as it sort of sits, because, I mean, with most Middle Eastern perfumes, that's pretty much how it goes. You wear it maybe the first couple of times and the performance isn't that great, but then you let it sit for maybe a month or so, and then it becomes beast mode. So that may end up being the case for this one. But, I mean, again, for $19, I mean, you really can't expect, necessarily for it to be a super beast mode fragrance. But again, I mean, you get about 7 or 8 hours on clothes, which, again, for $19, what more can you ask for? So with this one, I don't really want to say that this one is better or worse, either way than the Louis Vuitton. I think with this one, it's going to come down to, again, what your preference is. If you're someone that doesn't necessarily like sweeter fragrances, and this isn't like a super sweet fragrance, but if you don't really like any sort of sweetness at all in your fragrances, and you prefer more so kind of herbal, soapy type of scents, then, the Louis Vuitton is probably going to be better suited for you. But if you do like, sweet, fresh, sort of scents, then this one is definitely going to be more so up your alley. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the Louis Vuitton is once the Louis Vuitton starts to dry down, it definitely, you still get that neroli emphasis, but it does start to roll more so into kind of like that tea note, black tea note that's in Imagination, and it becomes a little less soapy and just more so kind of like a smooth, calming type of scent. With the Imagination, in my opinion, the sweetness still kind of stays there, but then the Imagination also goes into like that tea note, but it still has like more of a sweetness to it than what Imagination does. All right. So if that sounds like something that, you would be into, I would say definitely go ahead and pick this up from labelperfumes.com while they still have it. Like I said, I paid $19 for this fragrance, and it's worth every penny of that. Let me know if you've smelled this fragrance and also if you've smelled the original Imagination, and let me know what you think in terms of how they compare. All right. So again, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and also share the video. That's Jamar from Vegas Sense. I'll see you on the next video.